They say no matter which direction the wind blows, you can always adjust your sails to reach your destination. It's the fine-tuning, it's in the details where all the craft and all the magic is. And our speakers today have yet again spoken about the legacy and also the way forward. So moving ahead, we have a fantastic panel discussion for you, full of people, a panel which is very esteemed, very diverse, very inclusive, if I may say. And at the same time, it takes a preview of what we are trying to do in the next 2 days, setting the direction, setting the stage for not just this conference, this event, but also what is to come in the years that are ahead of us. Ladies and gentlemen, this panel discussion is themed as Setting Directions for a World of Tomorrow, how this tomorrow is going to be. And as they say, the best way to predict the future is to create one. So let's carry on and start collecting these insights and experiences that will really pave our way forward. For this, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming this fantastic panel. This is going to be moderated by none other than our chair of the School of Tomorrow and the CEO of the Beacon House School System. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Qasim Kasuri. And now, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming our power-packed panel. Please give it up for Cynthia Gaia, Dr. John Siraj Blatchford, Rashid Rana, and Dr. Faisal Khan.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the 15th edition of SOT events. So I am really glad to have all of you here today, and welcome to my distinguished panel. I know that we are going through a slightly challenging situation, so your presence means a great deal to me and to all of us at Beacon House, so thank you once again. So our panel discussion today is called Setting Directions for a World of Tomorrow, but actually what we are going to try to attempt is to set directions for this event, for the School of Tomorrow Edition 15, Guardians of the Future, which in turn we hope will help to set directions for a world of tomorrow. The objective of the panel discussion today is primarily to make sure that we talk a little bit through this distinguished panel that I'm fortunate enough to have, about some of the key themes and dimensions of the conference. I will introduce the panelists in a minute, in case they're wondering. But first, I just want to say one thing about the SOT, which is a question which often is asked, which is why the SOT? Why do we organize this event almost annually? Although over COVID it was online. Now the reason for that is fairly simple. Beacon House has always been a learning organization. Many of you in this room have been associated with Beacon House for a number of years, and you will hopefully agree that continuous professional development is a hallmark of Beacon House. Some years ago, we began to also feel that we bear a really heavy burden, a heavy responsibility, because the lives of hundreds of thousands of children depend on decisions that we make as educators on a daily basis. And so we felt and we continue to feel that it is our responsibility to ensure that we are creating an enabling environment which offers the best practices, which will help to ensure that we are not preparing children for a world that no longer exists, or certainly one that will no longer exist by the time they enter the workforce. So over the years, there have been many tangible and intangible outcomes of the SOT conference. So we have made many changes to the direction of the organization. There have been certain projects that have come out of the SOT, and then a lot of other changes, which I suppose will take a long time if I get into the details, but it's mainly been about our approach to teaching and learning. In this particular event, I'm really happy to mention that we've also tried to include as many guardians of the future, as in young people, young students, because it would be kind of pointless having conversations about their future without including them. Admittedly, we don't have one on this panel. But you'll see that in many panels, we will hear from young people. We'll try to better understand what their aspirations are. The 5 key dimensions of the SOT have already been highlighted in the chairperson's speech and through Sidra, our wonderful host. These 5 dimensions, or you can think of them as aspirations, at least the first 4, are an inclusive future, a balanced future, an expressive future, and a peaceful future. And I'm hoping that today, during this panel discussion, we can talk a little bit more about some of those dimensions so that you guys can better understand what we have in store for you over the next couple of days. So I'm going to start off with introducing the panelists. So on the extreme left, we have Dr. Faisal Khan. My left, I guess, your right. Dr. Faisal Khan is a synthetic biologist who works in the biotechnology field, and he also works in AI. Dr. Khan works sort of at the, you could say, at the intersection of big data, biology, and technology. He holds a master's and a doctorate from University of Oxford in Cell and Systems Biology. He was the founding director of the Institute of Integrative Biosciences at Seacoast University in Peshawar. He presently, I believe, leads the Precision Medicine Lab under the National Center for Big Data. He was nominated as a Young Global Leader from Pakistan by the World Economic Forum in 2019 and appointed an advisor to the Minister for Science and Technology in KPK in 2021. Thank you, Dr. Faisal Khan, for being on the panel. We'll hopefully be talking with Dr. Faisal Khan a little bit about the unknown future, which is the dimension of the conference, about AI and the impact of AI on the future of work and careers of young people today. Next to Dr. Faisal Khan is Ms. Cynthia Geyer. Ms. Cynthia Geyer is a dignity advocate. She has a distinguished career in the social development sector. She was the first executive director of the Global Dignity Organization, also an initiative of the World Economic Forum, and one which was co-founded by the Crown Prince of Norway. Prior to Global Dignity, she was Director of External Affairs for a prominent museum in New York City, before which she was the founding director of the Portland Schools Foundation in Oregon. Some of you in the room may know that Beacon House works very closely with the Global Dignity Organization, so we're thrilled to have Cynthia with us on the panel today. And we hope that we'll talk a little bit more about an inclusive future, a different aspect perhaps of an inclusive future, and also of a peaceful future. We want to explore the connection between dignity, compassion, acceptance, and perhaps a peaceful future. We then have Dr. John Siraj Blatchford, who is an inclusion specialist. Um, he works with socioeconomic, cultural, and gender differences, because when we talk of inclusion, we're not just talking of learning differences. There are a lot of other aspects to inclusion. He is an honorary professor at the School of Education, University of Plymouth. He does research in early childhood education and education for sustainable citizenship. John is also the founding director of Schema Play, a company that aims to contribute towards improvement in the learning outcomes of disadvantaged young children, and therefore narrowing the gaps in their learning outcomes. So Dr. John Blatchford is going to help us talk about an inclusive future. Thank you, John, for being here with us today. Finally, last but not least, we have groundbreaking artist Rashid Rana with us. Rashid has been on this panel a couple of times before, I think once in Lahore and once in Karachi, but every time he's on the panel, he adds more feathers to his cap. Rashid is a Dean of the School of Visual Arts at the Beacon House National University, Visual Arts and Design. As I mentioned, he is one of the country's leading artists. Recently, he was celebrated greatly for having designed the exterior of the Pakistan Pavilion at the World Expo 2020 in Dubai. So I guess you guys have heard about that. He also received the Sitara Imtiaz in March 2022, and he has a lot of other awards, which are going to take a long time to mention. But thank you very much, Mr. Rashid Rana, for being on the panel. And we're going to talk with Mr. Rashid Rana about an expressive future, or a more expressive future, because as you know, we are with this increasing kind of obsession that the world seems to have with technology. We believe that it's super important that we need to really continue to build on the expressive arts, because in many senses that's what holds us together as a civilization. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to start off with a quick opening question for each panelist, which will also give them an opportunity to give an opening statement. Dr. Faisal Khan, we'll start off with you since you're on the far end. So can you explain to us in layman's terms what synthetic biology and biotechnology are, and why you believe they are important for the future of humanity?
Thank you. Total pleasure to be here, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity. And thank you, Rashid, of course. So we all know that most of the systems that we see in nature are coded for by DNA. DNA is almost like an English word, right? It's not a science word anymore. We all know that some diseases are coded for within the DNA. But there are some things that most of us are not aware of, and they're the following. We have millions and millions of species on planet Earth, the biodiversity, the whole beauty of it. But all of that is coded for by the DNA molecule, which is the same language across all species. So a coronavirus, a cucumber, yourself, me, we are all coded for by the same language. And that's profound. There's the universality out there unites at the bottom as you zoom into the cell. I don't want to go into the philosophy, but let's call it fact number one. Number two, we are all familiar with the advances we see in IT, for example, and that's mostly thanks to Moore's law, the fact that transistors have been developed at a rapid pace throughout the past 20 years. That's why you just chuck away last year's phone, get a new one, because it's so advanced in 1 year's time that it's almost very slow for your everyday use. It also has a consequence, which is last year's technology gets cheaper so fast that it's democratized at the back. So the faster it develops, the cheaper it goes, and the more accessible it becomes to the masses. But fact number 2 would be, many people are not aware the equivalent technology in biology, which is DNA sequencing, is 13 times faster than Moore's law. Have you ever heard of something which has reduced in cost over a span of, let's say, 10 years by 3 million times? Nope. That's DNA sequencing. And that's what's revolutionizing how we look at biology, how we look at the life sciences, and how we look at the industry. Because initially people are talking about how do we industrialize biology? How do we get the products out of it? How do we impact? How do we save the planet? Now we're talking about biologizing the industry, because biology is so cross-cutting, and it's become, the technologies behind it are so accessible now that a tectonic shift is underway now. That's fact number 2. Number 3, biology is digital because you can read the DNA through DNA sequencing, which has gotten cheaper. Literally, they're like text files on your computer. Maybe 5 years down the line, your biology A-level student might not need to step into the biology lab because everything's on the laptop. From a jellyfish to a cow to the frog that he's supposed to dissect, everything's on the laptop in terms of DNA. But that digital format of life has to come into a physical form if you're going to inject it into something, let's say a seed of a plant, to be able to express and give us those details, right? Let's take the example of insulin, for example. We steal it from one organism, we steal it from humans, we put it in a yeast or a bacteria so it can grow and give us a lot of insulin. So it's basically a human gene, but it's expressed by a yeast gene. So you really need to convert that digital format into a physical one, and for that we need DNA synthesis. And the news is that that's undergoing an exponential drop in costs as well. So I'll summarize. You can read DNA using a USB stick size of an instrument, cheaper than your iPhone today. I'm not talking about the future yet. And you can easily synthesize those genes that you design from scratch in rupees, like in thousands of rupees. And that's what you do sitting in Peshawar. That's why it's enabled us now. Over the cloud, we place our order, 5 days later, the FedEx guy is there with new novel genetic circuits. So to summarize, synthetic biology is this new age biotech which has put everything on steroids, and I'm not sure whether we all are ready for it. Whether it's on the technical side, on the workforce side, on the school side, for example, are we teaching our biology students enough? We've been talking about digital literacy. We also talk about, let's say, AI literacy, but how about DNA literacy? And serious stuff is expected to happen when this overlaps with AI. And let's say neuroscience, science of the brain in general terms. So for me, that's the biggest unknown there. The overlap of these major technologies, you can even rope in blockchain, for example, which are revolutionizing our lives and our societies on their own, but wait till they start to speak to each other. And my greatest fear is, and I'll stop my comment on that, is whether we are technically ready for it, A, and B, whether we're ready for it as a society. Because the ethical, legal, and social discussions need to be had in the ethics, Islamiyat, whatever classrooms, right? We need to be discussing about these technologies if you really want to participate in their development and also give back to the world in terms of innovation, for example. I also look at it as an innovation, as an opportunity cost. If the developing countries are left out, it's not just a growing disparity which is threatening us, but also an opportunity cost for the global economy. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Obviously, I'd love to talk about the implications of the things that you mentioned, but we'll come to that later. Cynthia, could we ask you to just say a few words on why the Global Dignity Organization was set up and why you believe it matters?
Yeah, can you hear me? Wonderful. I just wanted to say two things to thank Beacon House and Schools of Tomorrow for having me. My parents were actually married in Karachi in 1952 when my father came as a 21-year-old working for the United Nations to open the first office of the UN here in Pakistan. So it's my first trip here, and I just feel nostalgic about that. And secondly is the first executive director of Global Dignity, and I'll tell you the story of how it was founded and why we think this work is so powerful and transformational. Beacon House has been a partner of the organization, and I've always admired the learning organization philosophy of Beacon House, and also at the end of the day, what do we want our young people at 17, 18 to know and be able to do? And I just have so much respect that Beacon House, yes, thinks about academics and the core skills that young people need to function in the world today, but also puts a huge premium on values and a worldview that encompasses all the questions that we're talking about at this conference today. Because to repair the world, whether it's the environment or the refugee crisis or disparities in income, inequality, violence and war, it's going to take the next generation to have those values and that commitment to healing the world beyond just the core academic skills. So hats off to all of the work that you all do with 350,000 young people every year. It's just amazing. So yes, we were started, Global Dignity is a nonprofit NGO, started about 15 years ago by 3 young global leaders at the World Economic Forum. You know that they have this very selective young global leaders, of which you are one. About 100 future CEOs, future civil society leaders, future prime ministers, who come from all over the world and are put together in sort of like a boot camp or graduate program. And one of the things you must do is, I don't know if they still do this, but find other people that are so unlike you from somewhere very far away and think about doing a capstone project together. So in 2007, the next king of Norway, who's a lovely person, Crown Prince Haakon, got together with a young African-American activist from Los Angeles who had grown up poor and homeless, and a philosopher PhD student from Finland. And the 3 of these young men got together and thought about what they should do for their year-long project together. And people were doing Save the Oceans, people were doing refugee work. 15 years ago, that was becoming a huge concern for leaders all over the world. People were doing gender rights, women's rights. And they sat and had a very long conversation with themselves and other people who were present about what is the one thing that no matter if you're a business leader or a teacher or a school leader or a prime minister, if you understood this way of looking at the world, everything would change. What is this most powerful transformational concept? And they came up with this notion of dignity, which I believe is a word that is used a lot, but we don't often step back and understand what it is in its most simple form. And it's so much of what Daniel was talking about in his remarks about belonging and inclusion. Dignity is really about in your heart, in your soul, that you matter. And that when you look at another, no matter what the color of another's skin or the gender or where they come from, their class background, it is that I respect the dignity of this other person. And it's such a simple idea, but until you really grasp it and embody it, it eludes far too many of us, too many of our young people. And this notion of dignity, they thought, well, it's kind of like intellectual and it's a big idea. Why don't we leave Davos, snowy mountaintop in Switzerland, and go down and find a government school and find second graders, 7-year-olds, and ask them what they think about dignity. And on the way out, they ran into Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was hanging out with his good friend Richard Branson, because this is what Davos is like. You meet people like this in the hall. And Peter Gabriel, the musician from London, was there. And they said, why don't you come with us to the second grade classroom? We're going to talk about dignity with 7-year-olds. And they were nervous because they thought maybe this is going to go right over their head. But they basically did what our curriculum, now in 80 countries, reaching about 5 million children a year, schools, refugee camps, youth groups, still does today, which is a conversation about when you've been treated with dignity and when your dignity has been violated or humiliated. And 7-year-olds, 5-year-olds can tell you this out of their gut. When they have felt the things that Daniel talked about, that they felt supported, they felt honored for who they are as people, and then there's no stopping them. And when people in their family, people in their community, people in their schools had humiliated them or dissed their dignity, just how crippling that is, how powerful it is, and how you never escape those experiences too. There's researchers at UCLA who basically do brain research and find that the same part of your brain that goes off when you are stabbed with a knife is the same part of your brain when you are hurt, humiliated, when your dignity is violated. So it's a very, dignity is not a value, it is not the same as compassion, it is your birthright. But far too many young people, and I would say people everywhere in the world, do not have that opportunity to find their own voice and their own dignity and their own sense of purpose and agency. So that is really what the work that we do is all about all over the world, and so much resonance with what Daniel talked about, what happens, the power that you unleash in a human being when they decide that they want to honor their own dignity.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And this is precisely why we feel that dignity is the sort of perfect vehicle or perhaps one way of looking at an inclusive future and a peaceful future, because in fact in one of your panels tomorrow, I believe, you're talking about the connection between dignity and a peaceful future. So thank you for being here. Dr. John Blatchford, once again, thanks for being here. By the way, guys, I've been told we have to speak into these mics, which I know is a bit awkward because that's how they work. So my opening question to you has actually changed a bit after the keynote speech. And so our keynote, but still fairly straightforward. Our keynote speaker said that over 80% of people, whether at university like Oxford or at a prison, had some form of, I think, learning difference or special needs. So the question is that then how do we define what is normal and what is not when we're talking of inclusion?
What is normal? Can everyone hear me? Yes? You're throwing that question on me. Okay, what is normal? What is different? We put people into groups, don't we? And we assume that we know what that group is. I know I share with Daniel a real dislike of labeling groups. Talked about dyscalculia and dyslexia and autism as these defined groups of people that are somehow abnormal. Well, I think the best way to understand all these groupings is to think about how great is the diversity. I know a genetic biologist will understand this very well. The diversity within all these groups is greater than the diversity between these groups. Sorry. Do you get that? The diversity within, I'm talking about every group. whether it's an ethnic minority or ethnic majority in your society, whether it's men and women, whether it's autistic people and other people who aren't autistic, within those groups, the diversity is greater than between those groups. Sorry. Is this better? Okay. I think a very wise person once said, a map worth having is one with utopia on it. And I think it applies to policies and agendas generally. We ought to think about what is the ideal. And for inclusion, my utopian, is universal personalized education. Universal personalized education. An education where every child is catered for according to their particular needs. I first came across the word inclusion and inclusive education when I was a practicing teacher. And it was at a time in the 1980s when in England we were closing a lot of our special educational schools. And those children were going into mainstream schooling. And I was trained to deal with that, to be able to cater for those individual needs within my mainstream class. And for many of my colleagues, this was a great shock, a horror for many of them, in fact. It was so difficult. And the strategies we were taught, very much as Daniel was saying there, was to begin the lesson with an organization of what it is we're going to learn and to try to personalize it with those individuals who need personalized help in making it meaningful to them, and then at the end of the lesson, adding something on to pull things together. The psychologist who made those strategies very famous at that time was David Isabel, a developmental psychologist in the USA. And he was asked once, if psychology, if I ask you, what has psychology got to say to education? What do we know from psychology that we can use practically in education? He said the one thing that's more important than anything else that we've learned is you have to start with what the child already knows. You have to build from their prior knowledge. And in that sense, if we think about that, if we think about the truth of that, then we realize that personalized education is inevitable. It's not something that teachers have to give. It's something that only happens if we actually are associating, or what we're talking about is of relevance to the individual child. They only learn what it is that builds on what they already know. So personalization is something to do with how effective we are as educators. That context of learning difficulties was the original context within which I understood the word inclusion. I came to teach in inner city London schools, and one of the things that at that time many teachers talked about, many head teachers, many politicians, was that it was inevitable that the outcomes for children in those schools was low because the number of languages that the children had. We had a great deal of diversity, ethnic diversity and linguistic diversity in London. And it would be inevitable that they would not achieve as well as the ethnic majority children throughout the country. That's not true anymore. London schools are amongst the best in the whole of the UK, because it was never true that language is actually a disability in schools. It was to do with the expectations that the teachers had and the aspirations, in many cases, that the children had as well. But migrant families to England have very high aspirations. That's why they go to England, because they have very high aspirations for their children. So, of course, they've proven the educators wrong in the long run. In some subject areas, there's an issue of inclusion with girls. In science, mathematics, in computing studies, even more so. And girls aren't taking up those careers. Psychologists used to say once that was because that was hardwired for girls not to be able to do that. Remember what I was saying about the diversity within every group being greater than the diversity between groups? It's totally untrue. If you look at the statistics, the average girl outperforms the average boy in every subject in the UK. So they do better at maths, they do better at physics, they do better at... That's the average. The average. And so there is no problem with that. What's normal is neurodiversity. It is the fact that we're all so very different. That's the real norm.
Thank you. Even in Pakistan, I think on average girls outperform boys in pretty much everything, it seems. We'll come back to this in a bit, but first I'd like to ask my opening question to Mr. Rashid Rana. And then after that, we're going to have just a few minutes for a very quick discussion. So Rashid, my question for you is that we've seen recently, all of us have seen how AI as an artificial intelligence has managed to create art which, based on machine learning, and it seems to be, that ability seems to be improving exponentially. So will we even need human artists in the future?
Thank you, Qasim. First of all, there are two things common in 3 editions of SOT. One is my inclusion, and second is something weird happens in the city. So maybe you consider not having me next time. I'm aware. Predicting future, it's a very tricky business. Is it my phone? No. We have seen science fiction from 70s, 60s, Star Trek, and now compare those large switchboards with the sophisticated touch-tone phone we have. So it's whatever we try to predict, it only represents our limitations with which we try to think of our wishes for the future. But we can still have a go at it. My colleague who has co-curated this exhibition that you will see after this panel, which is called Coexist and Co-Exit. The tagline that she came up with is, the future was today. So with the pace, things are changing, especially my generation, which is often referred as Generation X, has seen more changes than any other previous generation, the shift from analog to digital. And we've seen VCR and VHS coming and going and leaving and as if it never existed. So we carry a lot of anxiety as vis-a-vis how the future looks like. I had this realization very recently. I've been thinking up till now that me and my colleagues at School of Visual Arts think very in a cutting edge way. But I thought that it's actually the anxiety that we carry. Because if you talk to the young ones, they're not worried about the future, or they don't have this, they're not trying to predict it, they're easing into it. So, so regarding the AI, we must not forget that we are the most sophisticated machine on this planet. So it gives me goosebumps when we think that a bunch of machines are gathered here and trying to predict how our future looks like. But anyway, self-discovery is our forte, is our fate, is one of the key things that we do with trying to find our purpose and who we are. So I think it's a legitimate attempt. About the concern whether the art will be relevant or not, art, as we have known in the last 100 years or so, it already doesn't exist. As we know that art is becoming more and more unrecognizable. Anything and everything can be art. So it's really a condition of history which is passing. And since we had this lens for last 100 years or more, we see everything of the past with that lens and call it art, whereas whether they called it art or not. Those people did not produce a Sistine Chapel with the intention of creating art. They did not they did not go to a shrine to sing Qawwali that people will come to attend a concert. All those creative productions and acts served some sort of function of life in the past. But in the last 100 years or so, we have known creative production in a whole new mode where you produce something for the audience. And I think that era we are passing. We are perhaps departing from that phase. But to answer your question more specifically, the answer is no. Artists and humans will remain relevant. When camera was invented in the mid-1800s, this was probably one of the fear that what would be the role of the artist, because you can now depict the world around you so perfectly. Photography is a so-called perfect illusion that what are the artists going to do? And we have seen amazing ideas and movements emerging in the last 100 years or more, despite the invention of camera. So I would say this sophisticated machine called human will find other ways, will adapt, will have more exciting things to do when some of the acts will be performed by machine and AI.
I'm sure that's reassuring to all of us in the room, artists or not. But it does take me now back to Faisal. And guys, we have this countdown in front of us which says 10 minutes. So I would request you to keep your answers like literally 30 to 40 seconds if possible. Just keep looking so that we can go through, a couple more questions. So connected to what Rashid was just saying right now, that there will be possibly AI and robots in the future, allowing humans to do more interesting and complex things. But then on the other hand, what about in countries like Pakistan, where the vast majority of our labor force is still unskilled? And we've all seen recently the launch of this Tesla bot, in which Elon Musk claimed, and I quote, that his bot is going to eliminate dangerous, repetitive, and boring tasks. But then could that not lead to a lot of unemployment?
30 seconds. So
45.
I want us to be slightly more grounded. Like, for example, especially as educationists, when you talk about sci-fi, Marvel movies, etc., it's all fun and very exciting and very, unleashes your creativity. But again, we need to be grounded in our realities, because we really want to train the next generation of workforce and also be able to leverage all what we have in economic terms. Unless we're grounded, we won't be able to do that. So when you look at robotics or AI, for example, there are certain limitations, right? For example, imagine you bring a swarm of Elon Musk's robots to Pakistan, or achanak light chali jaye. Like, we have a power cut, right? Like, it's funny for us in our local context, but batteries is a problem. It's a technical challenge. There is a capacity. Even Tesla is trying to grapple with it, right? So, and the other ones, any AI is as good as the input you give in, as good as the data you train it with. So I work in a hospital setting, and I stay away from saying, okay, it's going to replace all the doctors or the radiologists, because we've had algorithms already. I usually say that doctors who use AI are going to replace doctors who don't use it.
As opposed to AI replacing the doctors. Yeah.
So I think, we need to build our sort of framework around it and be able to, in a grounded manner, and be able to deliver on some tasks. So we actually learn from it, and we also deliver on, in economic terms, in education terms. But that would be my take on AI in 30 seconds.
I was hoping for a more Terminator 2 kind of answer, but I guess maybe not. But yeah, no, that's also very, very reassuring. Cynthia, again, hopefully quick question. We're talking of technology, we're talking of AI. Do you feel that technology has the potential to be a unifier, or is it just going to widen the gap?
Well, I think it's doing both. I think when Facebook and social media began, you know, we talked about the promise of connecting friends and family and networks. That was the good side. In the revolution in Egypt and Tunisia, Facebook and social media were hugely important in people being able to get together and form networks and get the word out. So it has that potential, but it also has the potential to, you see it on Twitter, you see it everywhere, to incite hate and violence on the other side. So it brings you back to this question of the technology isn't the issue. It is our way of looking at each other and the world and our values and how we use any skill and any technology. So again, back to the importance of helping the next generation and all of us, you know, all of us as adults, to get grounded in what it means to be human, to have a shared sense of our humanity, no matter what the difference of the other is, whether it be religious or ethnic or skin color or borders. We live in a time where you would think, because we have technology and we have solutions to many of the world's problems, why is the world experiencing so much hate and violence, autocratic leaders? What is going on? And it comes back to values, and people said something about the broken heart or the wounded heart. How do we heal our communities, our families, our schools, our societies? How do we elect leaders that lead with a dignity-centered or an inclusive-centered mindset? So I think it just shows that the technology isn't the issue. The technology will be here. It's how we use it and how we look at each other and the work we have to do to repair the world.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. It's a great response. And of course, I ask you the question because often the view is that technology is just widening the gap between the haves and the have-nots. But yes, you're right. In many respects, it's also, you know, it has also done the opposite. So, John, moving on to yourself.
Yes, you asked the question in the context of a particular group, and it immediately brings to mind a gender agenda. I lived through the introduction of technology in the households, washing machines, vacuum cleaners, all of those things really were introduced into homes during my lifetime. And there was a lot of talk when it was first done that this would liberate women and it would free them from domestic work entirely. Of course it hasn't. They still operate those technologies very much the way they had responsibility for those things before. So, you know, it's not necessarily that the two are going to be connected to a given group. In England at the moment, if we talk about underachievement in schools, the group, the largest number, the largest group, I should say, who underachieve in our schools are ethnic majority boys. And I think a big part of that problem is aspirations. It's whether they have expectations to succeed in school when the people around them, their family, the men in their families in particular, are not providing working role models that do require education, and they don't have that expectation in their lives to succeed in schools. I think that suggests to me that already we've got a problem, that there is structural unemployment in many societies already that means that some occupations are deemed less worthwhile. And we need to deal with that and measure if technology can liberate us from all of those chores, then wonderful. It's not going to solve all our problems, but at least we should enjoy it. And we should prepare our young children to a more creative and expressive future rather than a work future.
Okay. Thank you very much for your comments. I was going to ask you something slightly similar in terms of technology and inclusion, actually. You may be aware that there's 23 million children in Pakistan who are out of school, as in out of any formal schooling system. Do you feel that perhaps using, and this is a conversation actually we recently had with Google, but I'd like to hear your perspective. Do you feel that there's some way in which they can be included in the formal education system, whether through using technology or not?
I don't know that technology is the answer in this situation because the technology just won't be available in the time span. We're faced, the reason that we have the floods is because of climate change. The world is faced with a huge challenge. The defined and agreed solution globally is convergence and contraction of carbon emissions, and that means that the developed world has a responsibility and a need to reduce its carbon footprint. It caused the problem, not the countries that are the victims of the problem. And there needs to be a transfer of resources, and resources need to be there in order to get that technology. As far as the delivery on the ground is concerned, I think the answer has to be integration. At the moment, you don't have schools are being used for people to live in, where they're still standing, and many of them are lost. And similar things are happening in Nigeria, in many other parts of the world, and it's likely to increase. We need solutions that deal with that problem, and I think integration is the answer. I think the aid workers that are working on the ground at the moment need to have an educational agenda. They need to have some possibility of working with families and with children to actually make that an educational experience and to deliver education in the context of the disaster itself. Now, washing in schools, the water, sanitation and hygiene projects around the world provide a model for that. Anganwadis have provided a model for that as well, to integrate the education with other roles. And I think our professionals who are dealing with emergency situations need to have a much better knowledge and understanding of education so that they can support communities in delivering it on the ground immediately.
Thank you very much. I think apparently we're now running on negative time, but I'm just going to take the opportunity to ask Rashi the last question. The chairperson in her speech spoke about the metaverse, so this sort of virtual reality world which a lot of tech companies are bent on creating. What do you think is going to be the role of artists in the metaverse?
As I said earlier, that in the conventional sense, artists may not exist. We have seen in the recent times something that we never predicted until a few decades back, that each one of us will be a photographer, filmmaker, and we can broadcast now something which was considered $1 million thing to broadcast an activity or a match or something. So, so I think in metaverse, we're talking about computer-generated environment where people connect virtually, and virtuality is something I think that's going to be at the front of all technologies, which is going to make a difference, especially in the visual world, and art is connected to the visual world. I believe that virtual is the new real. Until now, we very conveniently call physicality as the reality. So that notion is bound to change forever, perhaps. We have recently, because of COVID, experienced virtual tools of engagement, which perhaps may appear to be in 10 years' time very archaic and very, just like remember the dial-up tone internet, it wasn't too long ago. So I think in 10 to 15 years' time, very sophisticated tools of virtual engagement will be there that will change the way we relate to reality, and the boundary is going to be much more blurry. And that's going to be determine the form and the way creative practices are going to be manifesting.
Thank you very much. And I would even say that in order for this metaverse slash virtual world to be a place that people want to be in, we need artists to make it, look real and feel real.
I think they're already there.
Yeah, they're already there. So yeah,
They left the way.
great. Um, Faisal, there's one thing which I really want to ask, even though we are out of time, and I would like you to give me a very direct answer since you work in biotechnology, and one of the things which a lot of people in biotech are trying to achieve is life extension, as an exponential life extension for human beings. How, and of course synthetic biology is the field that underpins it, which is your expertise. So how realistic is that expectation?
So there are two steps to it. You have to slow aging
Yeah.
or talk about reversing that. So there are obviously different tangents that everyone's working on, but for it to come together and extend our lives by a few decades, I think there's a long way to go. But we do have breakthroughs, and we don't have time to go into it. But we are kind of beginning to scratch the surface on that. So longevity is the broader sort of term, but in our case, we say slowing the process of aging. That's where you start. And we have a good understanding of it, but we're yet to deploy something which gives us results.
So you're saying there hasn't been any major breakthrough in it yet?
Well, we do understand how it happens, but there's no breakthrough as such for us to be ready to call it longevity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. You wanted to say something?
Just wanted to very quickly say that when we talk about future, one of the limitations that we face, we talk about in terms of the labels that we know from 20th century. We're discussing art separately, science separately, and they may have new crossovers, new labels, new disciplines, which may not be as compartmentalized as we've seen in the 20th century. The other day I was listening to Dr. Faisal, and it seemed to me that one could use tools of scientific knowledge to express creatively. So I just wanted to point out that that's the limitation we do face.
Yeah, and I think when people see your exhibition later, they will actually wonder, is this art or is it technology? So yes, everything is converging. You're absolutely right. Ladies and gentlemen, we are like a few minutes behind schedule. So with this, I would like to conclude this conversation. You will have an opportunity to meet pretty much everybody on this panel over the course of the next couple of days. I know that John and Cynthia are on other panels. Rashid will hopefully be here because he and Risham have co-curated the immersive art show, which I would strongly encourage you to see after this. And I think Faisal might be returning to Peshawar, but that may or may not be possible. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our lead sponsor, UBL. And I truly do want to thank them because it is only through the support of organizations like UBL that we are able to get all of you together and to talk about the future like this. So thank you, UBL. Thanks also to our gold sponsor, My Backpack, and to a number of other sponsors who have made this event possible. Thank you to Google and to BNU for being collaborating partners on the exhibits. Thank you very much to the SOT team for everything that you have done, to the Beacon House head office and everybody who's worked really hard on that event, this event. And of course, thank you to Beacon House Newlands for hosting us. And my last request to you guys is that please do attend the sessions over the next couple of days. I know that we are going through a time of great excitement politically, but these things happen in Pakistan a lot. I've been trying to reassure our guests from overseas that inshallah everything will be fine. And yeah, we'd love to see all of you in the sessions over the next couple of days. Please also encourage your friends and colleagues to visit. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much, and look forward to meeting you all over the next couple of days. Shukriya. Khuda Hafiz.